The restaurant was silent, except for the sound of a child crying. Not a soft whimper, a full, shaking sob that made every spoon stop midair. At the corner booth sat a pale little boy, about 6, his face buried in his hands. His sobs echoed through the marble and chandeliers like thunder that didn't belong there. People started whispering. A woman in pearls sighed. Someone control that child. A waiter rolled his eyes. Rich people's kids, always spoiled. But Keisha Williams, the only black waitress on shift, didn't see a spoiled boy. She saw pain. Real, aching human pain. When she took one step toward him, her manager hissed, "Keisha, don't. That's Vincent Duca's kid. The man owns half of Chicago. You mess up one thing, we're finished." But the boy's cry cracked something inside her. She remembered her little brother Malik, gasping for air during his last asthma attack, and the helpless sound he made before the world went quiet. She couldn't ignore that sound again. Keisha placed her tray down and walked straight to the booth. 2 bodyguards blocked her path. "Back off," one said. She whispered, "He's hurting himself. Please, just let me help." Vincent Duca lifted his eyes for the first time. He didn't speak, but his hand moved slightly, a silent command. The guard stepped aside. Keisha knelt beside the boy, lowering herself to his level. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said softly. "It's okay. You're safe." No response, just trembling. So she began to hum, low and steady, the same lullaby her grandma used to sing on humid Memphis nights. The sound melted through the tension like warm rain. The boy's breathing slowed. His sobs turned to hiccups. A hush spread over the room. Even the clinking glasses stopped. Vincent Duca, the man everyone feared, sat frozen, watching a stranger calm what money never could. The boy leaned against Keisha's arm, whispering through his tears, "Mama?" Keisha's throat tightened. "No, baby, but I'm right here." The room stayed still, as if no one dared to breathe. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening, and the world needs to hear them. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the tiny kitchen of Keisha's apartment, bouncing off chipped tiles and half-dried laundry. She stirred her coffee with a shaking hand. The cut on her wrist still stung from last night's fall, but that wasn't what kept her awake. It was a boy's face, those pale, trembling eyes that looked at her like she was the first safe thing he'd seen in years. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She let it ring out. Again and again. Finally, she sighed and answered. Keisha Williams. A deep voice came through. Calm, cold, controlled. "Mr. Duca," he said. "My driver will pick you up at 10. Her stomach nodded. "You think I'm just going to walk into your mansion after what happened last night?" "I think," he said slowly, "you care more about my son than you pretend." Click. The line went dead. Keisha stared at her cracked phone screen, then at her reflection in the dull metal of the toaster. "Girl, don't even think about it," said Tanisha, her roommate and coworker, leaning in the doorway. "You don't step into a mafia man's house. You barely step out alive." Keisha smiled faintly. "I'm not scared of him. I'm scared of what happens if I don't go. That kid..." Tanisha crossed her arms. "You're not his savior." Keisha grabbed her jacket. Maybe not, but somebody has to try. By the time she reached the diner, rumors had already spread. Did you really touch Duca's kid? He could end you with one phone call. Rob, her manager, pointed toward the back door. "Pack up, Keisha. You're suspended till I figure out what to tell his people." She opened her mouth to argue, but her phone buzzed again. Text message. Driver waiting outside. Outside, a black SUV gleamed under the gray morning sky. The driver didn't speak, just opened the back door. Inside smelled like leather and silence. The ride was long, the city fading into trees, gates, and empty roads. When the car stopped, she saw it. A mansion straight out of a movie, guarded by men in suits, faces blank as stone. The gates opened. Keisha stepped out slowly. Miss Williams. A woman greeted her, elegant and distant. "Mr. Duca is expecting you." Keisha's heart raced, but her voice stayed steady. Tell him I'm not here for him, she said. I'm here for the boy. And with that, the black waitress from the city walked through those golden doors in the world of man everyone feared. The house smelled like money and emptiness, marble floors, cold air, silence heavy enough to hear your own thoughts. Keisha followed the housekeeper through long hallways filled with portraits of men who looked like they never smiled. When they reached a bright glass room, the air finally changed. Sunlight poured in through tall windows, bouncing off toys scattered across the floor. Crayons, tiny cars, a stuffed lion missing one button eye. And there he was, Ethan. The boy from last night sat cross-legged by the window, humming to himself in broken rhythm, staring at nothing. Keisha knelt a few feet away. Hey, sunshine, you remember me? No response. Just that quiet, lost hum. She didn't push. Instead, she reached into her tote bag and pulled out an old, worn cloth doll, hand-stitched, faded brown, one arm patched. This little guy's been with me since I was your age, she said softly. His name's Malik. Used to help me breathe when the world got too loud. Ethan glanced up. Just for a second, his small fingers twitched. That's right, she whispered. You can look. He doesn't bite. Behind her, Vincent Dukas stood in the doorway. No suit today, just a black shirt. Sleeves rolled, his authority softer but still sharp. He watched without a word. Keisha started humming again, the same lullaby from the restaurant. Sky so wide, baby don't you cry. Ethan stopped rocking. His lips trembled, and then he reached forward, slow, hesitant, and touched the doll. That simple motion hit Vincent harder than any gunshot he'd ever heard. How did you do that? He finally asked. Keisha looked over her shoulder. I didn't do anything. I just listened. He hasn't spoken in weeks, Vincent said quietly. Not since his mother died. Keisha's eyes softened. Then don't rush him. Silence doesn't mean broken. Rosa, the housekeeper, frowned from behind Vincent. The boy shouldn't be handled by strangers, she muttered. Keisha turned her head, voice calm but steady. Then maybe strangers are the only ones seeing him like a person, not a memory. Rosa stiffened. Vincent raised a hand, a silent order to stand down. Ethan picked up a crayon and pressed it to paper. One crooked line, then another. Keisha smiled. That's art, baby. Don't stop now. Vincent stared in disbelief. He hasn't touched those crayons in months. Looks like he just needed the right company, Keisha said, her tone warm, proud. Vincent walked closer, his shadow crossing the sunlight. You're good with him. She shook her head. I'm honest with him. Kids feel that. He nodded once, eyes unreadable. Miss Williams, I'd like to hire you for my son. Full time. Keisha blinked. I already have a job. I'll triple your pay. She met his gaze. You can't buy what that boy needs. But if you're willing to learn it, I'll help. On my terms. Vincent's lips curved slightly. Then we have an agreement. Ethan looked up between them, holding the crayon like a tiny flag of peace. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion that once felt like a museum slowly started to sound like a home. Ethan laughed sometimes now, quiet, unsure giggles that grew a little louder each day. Vincent noticed. He pretended not to, but Keisha saw it in his eyes every time he watched his son play. But not everyone was happy about it. One afternoon, as Keisha was helping Ethan draw in the garden, a black sedan rolled up the driveway. A tall man in an expensive suit stepped out, face sharp as glass. Rosa whispered, "That's Mr. Morales, one of Mr. Duca's business partners." The air changed the moment he entered the courtyard. Vincent greeted him with that same cold calm he used on everyone, but Morales' eyes slid straight past him, to Keisha. His lip curled just slightly. Didn't realize the staff included social projects now. Keisha froze mid-step. Vincent's jaw tightened. She's my son's caretaker. Morales smirked. Caretaker, waitress. Same thing. You know how people like her can be. Keisha's hands trembled, but she didn't back down. People like me, she said, voice low but firm. You mean the ones who do the work, while men like you take the credit? Morales turned toward Vincent. You're letting this. Vincent cut him off. Watch your mouth in my house. The silence that followed felt like thunder. Ethan gripped Keisha's arm tightly, hiding behind her leg. Morales chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're changing, Vincent, and not for the better. He turned and walked away, his voice floating behind him. You'll regret letting emotions cloud your judgment. Keisha's heart pounded. Vincent's fist clenched, but his voice stayed steady. Ignore him. He's not used to anyone challenging him. She looked him dead in the eyes. Neither are you. For a moment, neither spoke. Ethan tugged her sleeve. Can we go inside? He whispered. It was the first sentence he'd said to her since they met. Keisha knelt, smiling through tears. Yeah, baby. Let's go. Later that evening, Vincent found her sitting on the kitchen steps, watching the rain streak down the window. You could have stayed quiet, he said softly. I could have, she replied. But silence never saved anyone. He nodded slowly. You remind me of someone. Your wife. His voice dropped. She used to fight back too, even when she was scared. Ethan ran in suddenly, clutching his lion doll. He threw his tiny arms around Keisha's neck, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. Vincent watched, something shifting behind his stern eyes, guilt, gratitude, maybe both. Keisha whispered to Ethan, You're safe, baby, always. The boy smiled. Not a big smile, just a fragile, brave one, the kind that lights up an entire room. Vincent spoke quietly. He hasn't smiled like that since his mother's funeral. Keisha looked up at him. Then maybe it's time your house stops mourning and starts living. For once, Vincent didn't have an answer. That night, the mansion slept differently. The walls no longer echoed with emptiness, just a soft hum of a lullaby and the heartbeat of a little boy finally learning how to feel again. The next morning came heavy with unease. Keisha noticed at the moment she stepped to the front doors. The guards were doubled, the staff whispering, eyes avoiding hers. Something in the air felt wrong, like the calm before a thunderstorm. Rosa met her in the hallway, voice tight. Stay close to the boy today. There's tension. Tension? Keisha repeated. What kind? But the older woman didn't answer, just handed her a small silver key. For the back gate, she murmured, in case you ever need to leave quickly. Keisha frowned. Why would I? A voice interrupted. Miss Williams. Vincent stood at the end of the corridor, expression colder than usual. In my office. Now. She followed him into a dark room lined with shelves and leather. On the desk lay a thick envelope, unsealed. Vincent pushed it toward her. Someone left this at the gate last night. Keisha opened it and froze. Inside were photos of her, leaving the diner, holding Ethan's hand. One picture showed her entering the mansion. Another, standing by the garden window. Each one printed with a message in red letters. Babysitter's break. So, due next. Her heart pounded. They're threatening a child, she whispered. Vincent's voice was gravel. They're threatening me through you. She looked up sharply. Then whoever they are, they picked the wrong woman. He raised a brow. You should be afraid. I've been afraid my whole life, Mr. Duca, she said quietly. I'm just done letting fear make my choices. Vincent leaned back, studying her. They want you gone, and they won't stop until you are. Then fire me, she said. He shook his head slowly. That's what they expect. She crossed her arms. Then what do you expect? He hesitated. I expect you to be careful. That's not a plan, she shot back. His eyes softened just a little. It's all I have when people I care about start getting hurt. The words lingered in the air longer than either of them liked. Keisha broke the silence first. Ethan needs stability. You said it yourself. If I run, he breaks again. Vincent's jaw flexed. And if you stay, they'll come for you. Let them, she said simply. You can build walls, Vincent. I build courage. He stared at her, silent, then reached into his desk and slid the silver key back to her. Keep it anyway? That night, Keisha tucked Ethan into bed, humming softly. The boy clutched his lion, eyes already drifting shut. "You okay, baby?" she whispered. He nodded sleepily. "You're not leaving, right?" Her throat tightened. "Not tonight, sweetheart." Downstairs, Vincent poured a drink he didn't taste. The sound of her voice upstairs, that quiet lullaby, filled the house like a prayer. For the first time, he realized that protecting his empire had cost him peace, and maybe this woman had brought it back. The storm came without warning. Wind howled through the garden, rattling the magnolia branches against the glass. Keisha woke to the sound of footsteps, fast, heavy, running to the hall outside her room. She slipped on her hoodie and opened the door just as Rosa rushed past. "Stay with the boy." Rosa hissed, "What's happening?" But Rosa was already gone. Keisha ran toward Ethan's room. When she pushed the door open, he was sitting up in bed, clutching his lion doll, eyes wide. "Baby, it's okay," she whispered, pulling him close. "It's just the wind." Except it wasn't. Downstairs, a door slammed, followed by a man's angry shout. She crept to the top of the staircase, heart hammering. Two intruders, black masks, guns drawn, moved through the main hall. Vincent stood near the fireplace, pistol in hand, voice low and sharp. "You made a mistake coming here." One of the men laughed. "We're just sending a message. That waitress doesn't belong here." Keisha's pulse roared in her ears. She turned to Ethan, whispering, "Stay under the bed. Don't move." Then she grabbed the closest thing she could find, a metal lamp, and crept down one step at a time. The moment one of the intruders turned toward the staircase, she swung. The lamp cracked against his arm. He yelled, dropped his weapon, and chaos erupted. Vincent fired once. The other man stumbled and bolted for the door. Within seconds, guards swarmed the house. Keisha stood shaking, breath ragged, the lamp still in her hands. Vincent stared at her, half in shock, half in awe. "You could have been killed," he said quietly. She swallowed hard. So could he. He exhaled, setting the gun down on the table. Then, for the first time since they met, his voice broke. "You saved my son." Keisha wiped her trembling hands on her jeans. "You'd have done the same." He shook his head. "No, I would have hesitated." Ethan peeked from the hallway, eyes wet but calm. Keisha knelt and opened her arms. "It's over, baby. You're safe now." He ran into her embrace, burying his face in her shoulder. Vincent looked at them, a woman and a child he never expected to need, and whispered, "Maybe strength doesn't always wear a suit." The sirens faded into the distance. Rain tapped against the windows, washing away the night's fear. And for the first time, the Duca mansion felt like it had a heartbeat again. Morning sunlight spilled through the shattered calm of the night before. The mansion was quiet again, not the cold kind of quiet, but peaceful. Ethan sat on the kitchen counter swinging his legs, humming the same lullaby Keisha had taught him. For the first time, he didn't look lost. He looked alive. Keisha poured him orange juice and smiled. "You're getting good at that tune, baby." He grinned, a full, bright grin that made her eyes sting. Vincent entered, no suit, no guards. Just a man holding 2 cups of coffee. He looked at her with that tired, changed look. The one man where when pride finally steps aside for gratitude. "I can't repay what you've done," he said quietly. "You already did," Keisha replied. "You listened." He smiled faintly. "You're leaving, aren't you?" She nodded. "He doesn't need me anymore. Not like before." Ethan's small voice cut through the room. "You'll visit?" She knelt beside him, brushing his hair back. "Whenever you need me, sunshine." He wrapped his arms around her neck, whispering, "I love you." Keisha closed her eyes, letting that moment live forever in her heart. When she stood, Vincent extended his hand, not as a boss, but as a man who had finally learned humility. "You changed us both," he said. Keisha smiled. "Maybe you just needed someone to remind you what love looks like." She picked up her worn tote bag and walked toward the door. Outside, the air smelled clean after the storm. The magnolia trees shimmered with raindrops, petals falling like quiet blessings. She looked back once, Ethan waving through the glass, Vincent standing behind him, hand on his son's shoulder. The image felt complete. As she walked down the long driveway, the world seemed a little softer. She wasn't a waitress anymore, not just a helper. She was proof that kindness could walk straight into power and not bow. In a world built on fear, she chose courage. And for one broken family, that was enough to change everything. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it.